that last piece, I want you to know I've been trying to prove that whole issue of handwriting versus typing.
Okay, Chevra, we're going to get started. Wonderful to be with Rabbi Dina Najman, right here from New York. Whoa, I got to get up. And her wonderful husband, wonderful mother. It sounds like the other, the whole Chevra. The Halakhic status of clone kosher meat and pig, a cutting-edge topic from one of the top medical ethics experts in Jewish thought today, and extending into all other realms of technology and the like. So we have a live stream that has started here, and we are ready to go.
Surely, I thought we weren't doing introduction.
No, we're not. But this is an exception.
So, because Rosh Kehilah started with that introduction, and I'm glad that this is being videoed, so we'll see it later. I want to just first begin our short time together, expressing my hakar satov to Rav Shmuley Yankelowitz, because his vision encouraged to spearhead this rabbinic organization, Orthodox organization of Torat Chayim, is very significant and important nowadays. And with his humble yet strong leadership, we are trying to really work together to preserve halacha and kavod habrios. And I wanted just to offer thanks to Rav Shmuley and those who participate in Torat Chayim, and thank you all for also being here this afternoon. And it's a privilege to be a part of this rabbinic community, and something I certainly do not take for granted. So today, I hope everyone received a handout. I don't know if everyone was able to see, but in lieu of a PowerPoint lecture, and just because it's a half hour, I just wanted to begin by talking about something that seems to be the new rage of the day, and it's appearing in the news all over the place, and that is the topic of cultured meat, or lab-grown meat, or clean meat. There are many different names. It's interesting that the cloned meat title is what ended up making its way here. I'm sorry.
I know it's over here.
Oh, sorry.
I'm glad I get to hear a little bit of it.
It's unfair. But the cloned meat is actually not 100% accurate what happens in the lab, and I'm going to explain that in a bit. But it actually has been something that's been talked about since 1931. And you don't have this, but I had it up there for you. But Winston Churchill, in his published essay, 50 Years Hence, wrote, where he predicted what the world might look like in the 1950s, so we're a little bit behind. But one of his predictions were that human beings would figure out how to permanently divorce meat production from the animal itself. This is what he said. This is 1931. We shall escape the absurdity of growing a whole chicken in order to eat the breast or wing, Churchill prophesied, by growing these parts separately under a suitable medium. Because doing so would free up land that had been used for growing crops to feed farm animals, he concluded parks and gardens will cover our pastures and plowed fields. This dream of his in 1931 moved into the realm of reality with the first clean burger, which debuted in 2013 when the Dutch scientist Mark Post presented the world with the first lab-grown burger. Since then, large agribusiness companies Tyson and Cargill invested in what we call Memphis Meats. A big manufacturer and contributor is actually in Israel, known as Future Meats, and they're already working with China on some plan where they'll begin processing lab-grown meats for consumption for their citizens. There are some Today in Israel, I want you to know Israel's taking the lead on this. Some well-known technology groups which find their way in a lot of the papers and the internet, you'll hear about Super Meat, Aleph Farms, Future Meat Technologies, and Biofood Systems. These are a few where the laboratory production begins with actual animal muscle fibers, and it's produced without the living, conscious animal. Question is, why would a person prefer any laboratory meat over muscle meat directly, rather than directly from the animal itself? So there are multiple reasons, and and I'm going to start really with the idea of resources. So clean beef production, there was a research study in Oxford University in 2011, and it needs to be a little updated, but certain things that is consistent, is that clean beef production, meaning extracting muscle fibers from an animal and then growing them in the laboratory, that could require 99% less land. Raising livestock and growing crops to feed them uses large amounts of land, leading to mass deforestation. We've suffered a great loss in biodiversity. Each day, we lose an upward of 80,000 acres of tropical rainforest. With that, around 50,000 species become extinct each year. Also, with lab production of meat, there would be 96% less water utilized, producing 96% fewer greenhouse gas emissions than regular beef production. That's an enormous shift in terms of our environmental concerns. There are ethical concerns. Meat production has become unsustainable. I don't have to tell you about a lot of inhumane conditions for not only the workers, obviously the way the animals are treated, and it's unhealthy in many ways. Most animals raised for slaughter never set foot outside. They're forced to consume large quantities of antibiotics and other drugs. There's also poverty and starvation in our world. Not everyone can afford meat. It's not always available. There are people who require the nutrition, the iron that meat could supply. And this could yield far more opportunities to provide nutritious food to third world countries and communities struggling to feed their people. Meat demand is also growing fast. There's an estimation by 2050 that the world's population will surpass 9 billion people. According to the United Nations, meat demand is expected to be 70% higher than today. We do not have enough land or water to increase meat production by 70%. So either we reduce meat consumption, or we find a more efficient way to produce it. With cultured meat production, there is no requirement to have pesticides and chemicals. It takes place in a closed system to allow it to grow in a natural environment, and this would limit the slaughter of animals. According to the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, animal production, agricultural, produces 15% of greenhouse gas emissions. Cultured meat generates up to 96% lower greenhouse gas emissions, helping us avoid the disastrous consequences of climate change. So with that as potentially stimulus of why I believe this really belongs in a Torat Chayim discussion, where we really very much care about the environment and the needs of other people who have infinite value. It begs us to really look at this possibility, not only within halacha, but what it could be for the world. So first, let's talk about how this meat is produced. So you have some pictures there. I hope they came through nicely for you. I'm going to take one myself. So this is taken from the United Kingdom's press. how the burgers are grown. This is a very complex science procedure. I am sorry that I'm reducing it this way, but I'm going to try, with our limited time together, to go through how this works. So, if you can look really quickly at, I gave you a few little samples here, and you can follow either point 1, 2, 3, 4. It kind of differs. The fourth is a little bit more involved because it involves the operation through certain electrical stimulation. However, I'll just speak very briefly about how this happens. So first there's a muscle sample that's taken from an animal, and this is going to be important, by the way, for the Halakhic discussion. How it's taken, when it's taken. Is it taken from a live animal? Is it taken immediately after shechita? And when I say immediately, I mean when the animal is convulsing, because it does. Or am I talking about after it's completely, all the muscles and all the blood perfusion has completely ceased? The technicians can collect these cells. These are stem cells, which we are going to speak about momentarily. They take it from the tissue, they multiply them dramatically, and they allow them to differentiate into primitive fibers that then bulk up to muscle tissue. There's a place called Mosa Meat, which likes to talk about their procedure a lot. Not everyone follows this procedure, but one tissue sample from a cow, they said, can yield enough muscle tissue today to make 80,000 quarter pounders. A number, the startup said that they've actually begun to increase. Some say now it can hit up to 1 trillion. But clean meat is going to have to overcome a significant amount of variables to really make it worthwhile. First of all, it's cost and it's taste. Now, cost. In 2013, when Post, the first scientist to Mark Post from he was Dutch, the first one to produce an actual burger. When he made it, he said that it cost him $300,000 to produce that one patty. And that's a little bit more expensive than even, I don't know, we're watching La Marais, I don't know. But the expense of this meat will obviously have to fall. So since 2013, I can tell you that the expense has gone down to $600 per patty. Now what that means when I'm talking about production is what is going on in the lab, who's being paid, how the chemicals are working. That's something that we have to work. And given this trend though, because it's being reduced by so much, clean meat could become competitive with the traditional meat within several years, so much so that now they're saying they can actually produce it for around $6 a patty. So it actually is, and that idea is to shift it lower and lower and lower. And careful attention to texture and judicious supplementing with other ingredients could address some of the taste concerns. As of now, and there's actually been a development here as well, the majority of product that we get only has the morphology of something like with ground meat or ground chicken, where you would get something like, a chicken nugget or a beef patty. They're working very hard to get us that steak result, which actually just happened in Israel in Future Industries. To receive market approval, though, they have to go through certain, obviously, regulations, not FDA in America and other regulatory institutions outside of America to make sure that this is safe to eat. Obviously, that has cost, and obviously that takes time. Although there's no reason to think that there would be a health hazard, and we'll get back to that when we talk about stem cell, the FDA is only now beginning to see if it should be regulated. But I do want to make a little announcement that whether or not this is kosher or not kosher, the first chicken patty, chicken nugget, is going to start being ready for distribution and marketing in stores in 2 weeks. So this is, it's really hot off the press. But traditional meat producers are really pushing back, obviously. You can imagine how this is really affecting the meat industry. And they say that they should really make sure that it's labeled real meat or not real meat. However, this is the contradiction. They're saying it needs the same regulations as meat. So you can't both give it the same regulations as meat and at the same time say that it really doesn't deserve to have that qualification as meat. So there's a lot of pushback there. And despite these challenges, places are forging ahead. And we're really, they're producing hamburgers and steak and chicken nuggets. So let's go to stem cell. And I think I gave you some information there. This, I believe, and although many people have been writing and talking about it, I want you to appreciate the science of this animal cell, because it is not so clear when some of the halakhic responses kind of eliminated this very important piece. When I explained how the cell is harvested, it is taken from an animal muscle cell, and that itself is cut and sliced. And what we're able to extract is something called an adult stem cell. Now, I don't know if people are as familiar with stem cell research, which is something that for many, many years, certainly during the Clinton administration, there was a great development there. Israel also is they're leaders in stem cell research. I would say with G.W. Bush, during that period of time, those 8 years, it was definitely halted very much in America. However, in Israel, I don't know if you heard of the Christopher Reeve Institute. It gave a lot to Weitzman, really incredible stem cell research for spinal injuries, etc. But it's not only there. It makes its way in many different areas. Stem cell research in human or the body, in the human or the body, is something where most cells are differentiated. And I wrote down a little bit of a description for you, just so that you get all the points of stem cell. That really what happens is there's a master body cell, and they have the remarkable ability to divide and further differentiate into any one of the body's more than 200 cell types. That's for us. For animals, it varies. But these cells serve as a sort of repair system for the body, in that they can divide without limit to replenish other cells throughout the life of a person. Now, you want to talk about organ donation across the way. This is one thing that they've been working on, scientists have been working on, that potentially we might be in the future being able to really clone our own organs if one is needed. And that actually comes about through cloning after stem cells have been extracted. Why? Because they are able to divide and differentiate to the specific area you would need it to. And they really contribute to the renewal and the repair of a body. I'm going to skip the rest of that explanation and jump to potency. When we talk about stem cell, we're talking about 4 different levels of potency. Stem cells basically are, when we talk about after the very first few divisions of an embryo, that cell is called totipotent, which means it can go and become any cell type in the entire body. Then there's pluripotent, where it's a little bit more differentiated, presumably after the first few divisions, after cleavage and other divisions in the blastocyst phase, and it becomes a little bit more directed. This is going to go to the mesoderm, this is going to go to the ectoderm, this is going to go to the endoderm. It's a little bit more differentiated. And then, where do the cells go from there? That's where the cells start going to the specific areas of the body. So if you have multipotent cells, it's going to direct you, maybe this will make blood, okay? So these cells will go toward the bloodline. Now that could be white blood cells, red blood cells, bone marrow, but it will be moving that way. Or it'll be moving toward bone, or it'll be moving toward muscle, okay? So then that is more differentiated. And finally, you have unipotent, where this has been differentiated so much to the point that it's a muscle cell. So when we, and some people call it now at this stage of myosatellite cells, you might hear that terminology when they're talking about the animal cell. when we extract that animal cell, it is so differentiated that it is specifically only able to make an animal muscle cell. Which means, when I take that cell, and I take it as a stem cell, it is only going to make that. Did anyone see years ago when they did initially some of the stem cell and cloning pieces, they input an ear cell on the back of a mouse. I don't know if anyone saw the ear grow. Well, that was a unipotent cell. That was a unipotent ear cell, so it actually grew. Actually, it was a little bit more multipotent because it was able to do all the specifics. But it was in that stage, in that zone. This is going to be important now, as we're going to talk about some of the issues surrounding the halakhic permissibility of whether or not this meat is kosher or not kosher. Okay, if it's parv, even if we're talking about a non-kosher piece of meat, like pig, or something not permissible, usually to eat under kashrut, the kashrut regulations. So I want to examine, is this cell that we are taking, the first question I have, it's so small, it's microscopic. Is that going to be something that's permissible or not? Do I say that that has the morphology, or does it mean anything to me by way of being kosher or permissible? Can I eat it with, when I make that patty, can I have it with cheese? That's going to be some of the questions that we have. So because we have 10 minutes, I'm going to really get you to the halakhic debate. It was important to me that you actually see some of the major questions, some of the background, so that you can appreciate when people come up with some definitive halakhic responses to this animal muscle cell. So even though we're going to zip through these makaros, I gave you these sources so you can take it home, and you can even ask me over the break. But I want to just make sure that you understand how the process works. So now, you can appreciate that once that animal cell is extracted, that it's on the microscopic level. If it is on the microscopic level, what is it? So I'm going to tell you one very distinguished member of Torat Chayim, Rav Yuval Sholo, has been in the press a lot for saying that it doesn't matter if it's from a pig or if it's from a kosher animal or a non-kosher animal, it doesn't matter. Because it's taken from a microscopic cell, and it actually is going to proliferate and develop into a full-blown cell, and it's not distinguished as an actual animal muscle cell the way it normally would be in the confines of an animal itself. He argues that it is completely nothing. It's parv. It has no identity to an animal, and as a result, that is, and with all the nutrients, and it's wonderful, it's going to be a great nutritional source. He says that this is actually parv. Not only that, he says if you produce some kind of burger, right, that is something that you can actually put cheese on and enjoy a cheeseburger. Not only that, you could take a pig cell, and you could take an animal pig cell, which he holds is nothing. It's a microscopic level. I gave you some sources, source 1 and 2. One talks about the concept of mayim almighty. It's like a nothing. We say that about fetuses. We say it about things that are so small they don't even matter. They don't even have any kind of identity. Or you can even talk about it in terms of kashrut when people talk about bugs. You know, the Aruch HaShulchan is known to say that if you can't see it, it's something that's not visible. If it's not visible without the microscope, right, then you know that it really is not something that I'm going to have to worry about. Also, not only that, he says the identity that develops from there is not grown normally. So therefore, the whole identity of this piece of meat, says Rav Yuval Sholo, is that it's nothing. It's a nothing. And I would argue that in addition to saying this, he also he has some people who are also definitely on his side with this. Rav Shlomo Aviner, who's a very well-known posek, he also agrees with Rav Shlomo. And he said the essential issue is, and this is a quote that I wrote down, we should rule according to the process. Should we rule according to the process or according to the result? And quite convincingly, he claims that we should just look at the process, and he says that's really what kashrut is about. And therefore, he concludes that lab-grown meat is clearly parv and neutral. So, this is one position, one opinion. On the board I will give it to you. Maybe I'll send you the slides if you like. But this is a very interesting position. And you can appreciate how there's been pushback. And Rav Yuval Shlomo himself has said, it doesn't sit right with some people. It doesn't sit right that they should have a cheeseburger. They might say, it's really not allowed. Halakhically we would do it, but kind of like it's kind of positive. Like you don't want to do something like that. I would like to push back in a different way with Rav Yuval Shlomo, with all due respect, and I really this to his great halakhic knowledge. But I do want to say, when we look at stem cells in particular, it is not like other cells. Other cells could be FS, but when you look at a stem cell is something that is already differentiated. It already has the name of the place where you've taken it, where you've extracted it. So therefore, I would argue respectfully that if it's from a stem cell, if you're talking about other cells, which they have yet to do, these are stem cells that they're utilizing, it's been so differentiated that it already has gone through a process of becoming an animal cell that eventually becomes, that's its path in life. It's already been destined to do that. So you're right, Rav Avner, right? I could say that he wants to look at, he wants to look at really what we have in the end. I pretty much can say you can look at the process, and the process looks different. But the origin of this cell is one that already has a name because it's a stem cell. It has a name of meat. However, let me just say this. I agree that we should produce it and that it's kosher. But I think that we have to think about whether or not we're going to put cheese on that meat. I also think, for the world, which is what really bothered, which really was his concern, Rav Yuval Shlomo, is that we should produce this, and it should be something that we as a Jewish community are encouraging to happen. Because think about, once we could reduce that price, think about how much we could feed individuals. I also want to kind of handle some of the opposition of Rav Yuval Shlomo from a different perspective. And that is the next bit, which is an incredibly complicated halakhic issue, which people know about when we're talking about renneted cheese. There's something called a davar hamamid. That has been a major opposition to Rav Yuval Shlomo's opinion. And I actually want to do a corrective for those people who counter. Davar hamamid is a material which gives product its form. Now you remember that this is really not the first stage of extracting the cell. It's talking about the process by which that cell sits in a medium. You saw that little diagram. It sits in the medium. What is being used there? Good question. If it's going to be other animal serum, that's kosher. Another question. If it's going to be something that actually most labs are using now, they're not taking animal serum to grow the meat. Why? Why don't you want to grow the muscle there? Because then that would be more taking from an animal source, and we want to limit the amount that we're taking from an animal source. So what they've been developing is actually soy, yeast, more vegetable product that it grows in. But what happens when you have that vegetable product and, like, for example, a piece of pig in there? So, does it maybe get diluted into the solution, which was the opposition idea? And then it becomes something, in theory you would say it's batal b'shishim, it's nullified at a 60th, this is the problem. Devar Mami, even there's one or two opinions that say you could, most people say, Devar Mami, you cannot dilute, you can't do batal b'shishim with something that's an isser for achila. You can't do that. And most people, even if you hold by some of those opinions that, yes, you can, but once it's sometimes only when you first come to a place and then it changes and it shifts. The answer is that we don't say batal b'shishim with Devar Hamami. This is the problem with Devar Hamami. The problem is that a muscle cell doesn't dilute in these solutions. That's the point. These solutions are made so much so that the animal cell maintains its morphology and its integrity, and it doesn't dilute. You see it growing within these mediums. So I would like to argue that even if you want to disagree with Rabbi Shilo, that opinion of Devar Hamami doesn't make sense. Because if you understand how the muscle grows in the cell, it does not lose its integrity. And so therefore, it doesn't get mixed in with the rest. And that was an opinion of Rav Yaakov Ariel, who wrote a really good piece on Techumen on this in 2016. I do, however, want to go over something that you have in your sheet, which I haven't seen anyone speak about yet, but I do think that it's something that we should consider, which is the idea of those people who like to grow, remember these muscles, what gives it better taste? To infuse it with blood and fat and other items like that. Blood taken from an animal after it's shafted, or even if you've taken it out, the problem there is you're not allowed to soak that blood as an isser. You have to drain an animal with blood, not actually put, how many people have made liver, right? You want to put that, you don't want to put blood into that medium. It would help it grow. But that's going to be a little problematic. So I gave you that source from the Shulchan Aruch, source 5, that if you soak something, and believe me, it's more than 24 hours, they sit in for a few weeks in these mediums before they go into these reactors. And what happens is, that could be problematic from a different perspective. I do want to say, no one really has raised that, but I think it is an issue. But most people are not utilizing that medium anymore. We're not doing that. We're trying to use byproducts that are animal-based, and that are vegetable-based, and not animal-based, because that, again, will defeat the purpose of what they're trying to do. So most of these organizations, most of these technologies are not using blood anymore. So that helps our cause. So again, from that perspective, I would say, even for kosher meat, not pig, but kosher meat, that would be something okay. I want to back up for one moment. Devar Hamami would be a concern for only non-kosher meat, if it was true. That was raised as an opposition to pig. Okay, so I just want to make sure that that was clear, and what I said about the blood around, that is obviously for something that could be kosher or non-kosher meat, but that is something that we have to think about. So now, finally, with a few seconds to spare. Oh, and I do want to say one more thing is, when Post experienced, the first person who actually made the hamburger, when he uses animal-free substitutes to do the work, he says what he's working on is it's a little different than the bovine serum that he utilized. However, he said that it was really excellent in terms of taste. He's working on texture. So that's just one interesting thing. Finally, there was another opposition, and that's the opposition of Aver Minachai, which I was a little surprised when you see some of this opposition. Why would I be concerned about Aver Minachai? Because if I'm taking, remember I told you, how do I harvest that cell from the animal? If I'm harvesting it from the actual thigh or leg or shoulder of an animal, and the animal's still alive, can't I say that that muscle is something Aver Minachai? And by the way, it won't only be a problem for Jews, but it would be a problem for non-Jews, because we hold that the Noachai law, Aver Minachai, applies to them as well. So how do I understand the Iver min HaChai concern if it's alive? Now, technologically, it's best to harvest those muscle cells, those muscle fibers of tissue from a living animal. Why? Because the blood perfuses within it. And while it still is, it's a really great shape, and then you slice it up and you put it in the medium, and you extract those stem cells and it's ready to go. However, it's kind of like the difference when someone uses embryos for research, or they use like a placenta for research, where there still is blood being perfused, but there's more likely of success, and you can get more a better result if you would actually use something from a non-living. So if it was a shechted animal, and there are those who argue that you should be able to use lab meat, everyone's of opinion that you should be able to use lab meat if it was shechted properly, and then you actually are able to put it in, grow it in the proper byproduct, and obviously a lot of the more to the right institutions say make sure you have a mashgiach there to make sure that no one's eating over those things. Who's eating over those items? But okay, fine. You want to make sure that there's nothing going in. Make sure that the shiur is proper, and that everything is the up and up. Everything in the byproduct is good. Great. Okay. So that being said, everyone can use lab-grown meat in that circumstance. The problem is if it's so what happens if I take the meat, I slaughter the animal, and by the way, one animal versus many animals, I'll be able to get a lot more meat even from that one cell. So it's worth it. But if I slaughter one animal, at that moment of immediate slaughter, when the animal's convulsing, a Jew is allowed to actually benefit from. That's not viewed as Iver min HaChai. You can look at the Rambam. I gave you the Rambam there. But there's a certain shiur also. The Rambam says there's a certain measurement of how much Iver min HaChai a Jew is allowed to use. So I can take a cell, and for the Rambam, it's not an issue. So taking a living cell, according to the Rambam, is not going to be a problem because it's more the size. The shiur of Iver min HaChai is not a problem. But what about for a non-Jew? So that's different, right? It's funny how our standards are a little different. And there's an interesting debate about whether or not a Jew would be able to sell this. Is it Iver to do that? Is it you're putting an obstacle for them? Those are some of the issues that are coming up for Iver min HaChai. But you want to know if it's kosher for Jews to use? I will tell you, yes, absolutely. Okay, there's one more thing. Really? Okay, I want you to see this Simla Chadasha, who's 18th century Rav, a descendant of the Kosher, who wrote a very important text on Shechita. And he said that while it's still convulsing, we are still allowed to utilize it. So I just want to give that as an answer. I need to just close, if you could give me 1 minute. What Rav Yuval Sholo tried to do was a very important, eye-opening reality for our people, which is we have a responsibility when there's poverty, when people are starving, and there's an opportunity within science to really improve our carbon footprint to make sure, and that's why I gave you the responsibility of the creation in God's world. We're all, right? We were given the Ovdat with the Shomra. That was the directive that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us. And there are opportunities here to see, if possible, to utilize this to support it, and to see, if possible, if we can improve just our climate, to help people who are in great need around us, for cost effectiveness, for environmental issues, and really to care that there are those who are hungry and who require nutrients, and to support something that could be so necessary as this.
What age do you start extracting these cells from cows?
You can do it anytime, adult stem cell, even embryos embryo is not adult, that actually proliferates better. But from the first, when a calf is first born, there's already, adult means not that it's an adult, not that it had its bar mitzvah. An adult is that it really actually is